All right, Mo. So you're saying that riding a sport touring motorcycle or a dual sport is better through the twisties or canyons than a sport bike, because as you can tell, I'm a sport bike rider mainly. While I have all the appreciation for every type of motorcycle, I just feel like it would be a lot more fun to ride canyons with a sport bike, because I could feel like a lot of sport bike riders being like, no, a sport bike through the canyons is like,
Yeah, so from renting the motorcycles for several years and having to buy so many different ones and breaking them in, I spent a lot of time thinking about these bikes, and I understand now why often dual sport bikes will eat up sport bikes on some of these twisty roads. I also understand why a bike like the 1200 GS is one of the best sellers. I should remind you, Michelle, when you came up to Northern California and you rode with a group of very fast riders who shall remain nameless, you were on a Ducati Multistrada, essentially a dual sport. And they said, who's this chick riding with us? We're going to show her. You stayed at the front of the pack, and if I recall, two guys crashed, or at least one went off the road and one crashed, and you came back with no problems. You had a sport bike try to get in front of you, and you were going too fast for him, and he ended up crashing. Now, I don't wish that badly. I don't want to wish anything bad.
In case anyone was curious, he was fine, but he did dump the motorcycle.
We understand that some people just don't want to have somebody beat them, especially someone from out of town, and then a female, and then on a dual sport.
Yeah, they wouldn't even believe that I was like going on the ride, because they're like, you're on a Multistrada, you're gonna ride that to Mountain Diablo? And I was like, yes. that was one of the most memorable rides I've ever been on. It was really cool because we went through all those goat paths, and it was so sketchy. And guess who flourished? The ones who were on the dual sport, because we went on these goat paths, right? So there was dirt and then like gravels and potholes and all these things, and the Multistrada was just riding perfectly through it. The only issue that I kind of went through, that I was like, if I had to be concerned about something, was when we had to stop to wait for other riders, and we were like on a hill or an incline, and I'm 5'3" on a full-on Ducati Multistrada, like 1200, and I cannot touch the ground at all. So everyone was just watching me kind of lean over and like use my leg as a kickstand. That was literally the only way I can do it. But other than that, it rode beautifully. So you're right, like, and it handled so well through the canyons. And honestly, like, even my R9T is an amazing canyon carver. I was pleasantly surprised.
If you do the same canyons all the time, you're going to have more fun being on a sport bike. But if you tend to explore and do different twisties every time you ride, a naked bike might be more suitable. And to go back to that, how many times have you been on that road, Michelle?
It was my first time.
The first time. And that's the point we're making, is that when you don't know the road, if you're on a dual sport, you do have the advantage over a sport bike. Here you had sport bikes who couldn't keep up with you, and they knew the road because you're committed to a line. And if there happens to be something in your line that you don't see until you're halfway through the turn, you have fewer options on the sport bike because it is so committed than you do with the dual sport.
Yeah, now I'm thinking back that ride, and it is like there's a little bit more room for margin of error, I guess.
And the good news is you don't have to go all the way to a dual sport. I use it because it makes the point so well, but a naked bike will give you the same thing. And that's why, for me, a Street Fighter is an excellent option. The S1000R is an excellent option. In fact, the S1000XR, another bike you've ridden and enjoyed. The S1000XR, you can crank through some turns as well.
I was thinking too, maybe with like the sport bike thing, I think like it's a mental thing too, right? I feel like people who ride a sport bike feel like they have to go fast. In a lot of ways, like I've met a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I'm on a sport bike, so it's like meant to go fast. So I'm gonna like push it a little bit more. Whereas, when you're on a dual sport, or even a naked bike, it still can go fast, but it's like, I don't know if there's just like kind of a stereotype with sport bikes and sport bike riders and how you should be if you ride a sport bike.
Remember what I said, stability and agility are somewhat inelastic. So when you take that stability all the way up to 200 miles an hour, What are you doing to your low speed agility? It's not there. You know, just think about how fun it is riding a sport bike around at 25 miles per hour all day long. It's work,
Right.
it's tiring. So it's happiest when it's going fast. In fact, these bikes you see behind me, the K1600 GTL, by many people, they think it's a luxury touring bike. This is a full-on sport tourer. As a matter of fact, it's sort of like taking a sport bike at 450 pounds and
Mm.
expanding it to a bike that's 760 pounds, but with all the same characteristics. That bike is designed for sweepers at triple digits. Again, it's happiest going fast. When I'm splitting lanes on a GTL and I'm doing 25 or 30 miles per hour, the bike kind of wanders.
Right, right.
When you're doing 120 around sweepers or even somewhat rounded turns, that
Mhm.
bike is shining. That's the sweet spot. So again, stability and agility is somewhat inelastic. And when you're on a super fast bike, the stability is up here. It rewards you for going faster, so you tend to go fast. If you're riding a dual sport, you don't have that feeling of needing to go so fast all the time because it's very comfortable at 30 and 40 miles an hour. And then again, the naked bike is in there in the mix. It's not as extreme as a dual sport. It's a nice compromise between the dual sport and the sport bike.
So, what type of bike would you suggest for each type of rider? Like, for example, someone who daily commutes versus someone who just does like he's like he or she is a weekend rider who just likes to carve canyons and just go for nice rides versus track riders and
That's a great question, Michelle, because the way you framed it, it does paint a picture. So if I'm a canyon carver, but I'm always looking for new twisties, a naked bike or a dual sport might be a better option. If I tend to always hit, Mulholland Drive and Angeles Crest and Ortega, maybe then I use a sport bike because I know where my line, I know the line, I know my turn in, I know my apexes, I know my exits, and I can ride that road like I would a racetrack, knowing the line. But if I'm looking at new twisties every time or every day, always new twisties, I want to be on something that's more like a dual sport or a naked bike. And the naked bike is probably a better combination, a better compromise than the dual sport if you're going to be spending most of your time on the twisties.
well, that's true because in order to get to the twisties, you have to ride there and commute and get on highways and things like that too. So you have to take all that into account as well.
When I lived in Chicago, I used to ride 500 miles to get to the tail of the Dragon. That was my stomping ground.
Exactly.
Cherahalla, Smoky Mountains, and it's 500 miles. So I had a 650-pound motorcycle because I needed something that I was comfortable with on the highway for that,
Mhm.
8 hours.
Or bike just being tucked in completely for that amount of time, and then you get on the twisties because that's when you really do the aggressive, hard riding.
You're spot on, Michelle, because when I bought my S1000RR and I went to the Smokies, I put it in my pickup truck.
On the other hand, you can have like a fully modded track bike or even just a sport bike,
More people than you think ride their motorcycle to the track.
right? Yes, yeah, there are those. I have some friends who've done that. I think I may have done that once.
If you've done enough track days, I don't care what bike you're on, eventually you're going to get passed by a Supermoto or a Ducati Monster. And that it's because of that ability to change your line. So with a sport bike, with a pro rider on a sport bike, no question about it, it is the fastest way around the track. But for amateurs, we're not riding at the margin. There's always room here and there. And that naked bike is going to give you more line options. You can go in deeper and turn sharper. You can go a tight line more easily. There's different options you have with the naked bikes. We were at Thunder Hill. That guy was there with a GS 1200, and he put 17-inch front wheel on there and a wider rear tire so he could put race rubber on that bike. And he actually is a coach using a 1200 GS, and he's fast.
Right, right.
You've ridden Supermoto on track. You know how easy it is to change direction on those things.
Right. They're a lot more maneuverable. Right. I'm definitely the type to just want to learn how to master every style of motorcycle. But yeah, if you had to choose one, I get. I'm a daily commuter, so like you were mentioning that not everybody lives close to a canyon. It'll make the overall commute a lot easier and maybe even save energy on the ride because I feel like yeah, if you are on a sport bike and you're riding miles and miles and miles to finally reach the canyon, I feel like by that time you're already cramped up and pretty tired and you've expended a lot of the energy that you could have saved if you were on a more versatile motorcycle, like a dual sport or a sport touring motorcycle. And yeah, I see the point.
And this is a good place for us to wrap it up because you took me right back to the beginning. So a sport bike, if you take like a Panigale or an S1000 RR V4S, these bikes are 200-mile-an-hour motorcycles.
Right.
In order to be safe at 200 miles an hour, that bike has to be super stable. For those riders who might go east one weekend and might go west or north another weekend, and they're on different twisties, having a naked bike, many of them will be faster through the twisties because you have more flexibility on your line and you can go in faster into a blind turn because you're not as committed as on a sport bike. Once you're on a line on a sport bike, it wants to stay on that line. That's why they say one steering input per turn. Naked bike, you can make an infinite number of steering inputs. It may not be the best practice, but it's going to reward you for it, where a sport bike will punish you for it.